Hello everybody, I'm Sherban and I'll show you today how to build a very simple Spring app, and we'll discuss also about the Spring framework. So as you might have noticed, I said that Spring is a framework, and I would first like to discuss very briefly the differences between a framework and a library. Both of them are usable pieces of software that help you build your own apps, but there is a fundamental difference, namely that framework dictates the way in which you have to write your code. So basically the framework is the one that is calling your code, and the framework is in charge basically, whereas if you use a library, your code is in charge and your code is the one calling the library in the end. Right, this means that it's pretty hard to integrate several frameworks together, especially if they are not designed to work together, whereas libraries typically can be used together in a single code base without major issues. Okay, so going to Spring itself. So Spring is a framework which has several modules, several libraries in the end that you can use. Initially it started as a dependency injection framework, and then it grew from that into several other areas. We will use a few of these that you can see in this diagram. Basically we will use the web stuff, security, and the data access, and also one for communicating with the queue. Okay, without further ado, let's build a Spring app. So you can use start.spring.io. This is a Initializer, a website that the guys over at Spring built, such that you can generate projects. It will be a Maven project. So Maven is a dependency manager. The general idea would be that you should write as less code as possible and rely as much as possible on third-party libraries or libraries in general, such that you don't reinvent the wheel each time you create the application. And Maven is a tool that helps us in this direction, because Maven knows to download or to locate and then download the dependencies for us, and then basically also it can help to build and package all the dependencies together with our coding to create a single app. Okay, we will use Java for sure, the latest stable version of Spring Boot. And then when it comes to the group, so here you should write the inverse kind of package name, or a package name, like an inverse website. So I would say that you should start with the country or the top level domain, and then the name or the name of the organization, and then the name of the project. So it would be Romania, Spread is my nickname, and Practical Development Guide. Then the artifact is the name of this specific module or component, so this would be our backend. And the description, and anything in the end. We will build the jar, and we will use Java 11. Okay, and dependencies here we can add several. So we'll use the DevTools Lombok. Lombok is a small library which knows to generate getters and setters for you. Web, because it will be a web app in the end. Okay, let's also add the security library. Then for the database connection, we will use Spring Data JPA. We'll see in the next video what's that about. We will also use the H2 database and Flyway for database migrations. Lastly, we will use the RabbitMQ for a queue. Okay, and if you press generate, you will get a zip file containing basic coding. Okay, so I de-archived the zip file, and I right click and open IntelliJ. Right, and I already see my project. If it's the first time you open a Spring project, it might take a while to download the dependencies, but for me, I already have them cached locally. On the left-hand side, you will see the files from your project. I will delete these MVN files. These are just basically an embedded kind of executable that can be used to run Maven, but we don't need it actually because we have Maven in the IntelliJ IDE. Then let's just open the POM. So the POM is the main descriptor for Maven. Let's look pretty fast what's inside. So there is a parent specification. This is used to inherit settings from the Spring framework. We can check that if you control click on the parent and then on the parent's parent, here you will be able to see a lot of versions for a lot of libraries, in general third-party libraries. Basically, the developers over at Spring curated a list of libraries that they tested this version of Spring against. Okay, good. Then you have the Java version defined, and you have all the dependencies, right? So all the Spring and Spring Boot dependencies that we have in our POM. And lastly, there is a build step or build definition, which tells Maven how to package everything into executable. We are using Spring Boot, so in the end, everything will be packaged, in our case, in a jar, which can just be run, and then we'll start Tomcat, so a web application server. So that's basically one of the core features of Spring Boot, that you can directly package a single executable containing a web server and your app as well. Okay, and if we look at the dependencies, you will see that some of them are, let's say, simple, but some of them also have a scope, for example, runtime. So this means that actually you don't need it to compile the coding, and some of them are optional, which means that at runtime they are not really required to be there, and some of them are test scoped, meaning that they are just used for testing purposes. Good. I will comment out a couple of them, and that is because they do some configuration, actually not this one. So Flyway needs to be commented out. We'll discuss later why they do something, or it does something at the startup of the app that would prevent us from running it right now. And also security for a slightly different reason. Good. And that's about it. Let me move myself a little. So once you change the POM, you will see that the IDE says, okay, you changed something, we need to synchronize the IDE settings with Maven. So either you say, okay, import changes and it will import us now, but the next time you have to import again, or you enable auto import, which means that each time you change the file, you will get the settings updated. Basically, the IDE links in the external libraries kind of virtual folder all the dependencies that you have. So once you add a dependency here, it will be downloaded and added in these external libraries, which then is included in the compilation of the IDE of this project. You notice here that there are a lot more than just the ones in this list, because each of the dependencies in this list may have further dependencies of its own, and then the dependencies of our dependencies can also have dependencies and so on. So it's like a tree of dependencies. Okay, good. And then the next thing that I want to show you is the source code that they generated for us. So they generated in the source folder 2 subfolders, main and test. We won't enter the test right now. We just entered the main and Java. We want to look at the Java coding. There is a package which corresponds to our configuration in that web app that we used. And there is a main class, basically. And this main class, what it does is that it just calls the Spring framework. So basically, this is the entry point for the Spring framework, in this case, Spring Boot. And from this point onwards, basically, you lost control, let's say. You will just get control in some specific endpoint that Spring defines. And we will see more details next week. But we can already run the app. So I just clicked on this green arrow. It will compile, and now it started. Okay, let me move myself again. So basically, you can see that it said, okay, Tomcat started on port 8080. So this is the HTTP port. I'll explain this further in one of the next videos, and that it took 5 seconds. Okay, we can test to see if it really did anything by trying to access this port in Chrome. So if I go in Chrome and I go on localhost 8080, I would see a default not found page, and that's fine. Actually, if the server would not be running, it would refuse to connect. So we can test that. If I just stop and refresh, I will get the Chrome error that this site can't be reached. Right, so it was indeed our server which responded. Okay, and I can restart it. And the last thing that I want to show you is how to also test using Postman, because we will use Postman a lot in the future. So you first have to open Postman. Okay, so I opened Postman. I would really recommend using collections. So you can save requests in Postman, like kind of the bookmarks concept in Chrome. And you can organize them in folders and so on. So I'll create a Postman collection called Practical Dev Guide. Create it, and in here I can add a new request. The request name would be hello world. Okay, if I open it, I just enter the URL here, so it will be http localhost 8080. See, I used Spring a lot in the past, so I already have this URL. Let me drag myself, and I can just press send. It will be a GET request, and I get a not found. It's basically the same as in the browser. We will discuss why it looks a little different. Okay, and here you see that you changed this request, so you can save it. So if I press save, it's saved, and then I can just open it from here, and I have it here saved. So that's pretty nice. You can also sign in, and then you have a kind of synchronization between this computer and another computer. So that's all for this week. Thanks a lot for your attention, and see you next week with introduction to how to connect it to the database.